at preponderance amounts. And it really is one of those features that differentiates leadership versus leaders. Like you can have a title, but you might not have the skill set. And why emotional intelligence is such a key component into that skill set is what Lindsey and I really want to focus on, especially as we walk out of the pandemic and we're coming back into a new light. And really thinking about where is the mental health gone throughout the pandemic time? Why is emotional intelligence so important? And since this is a workers' compensation space, why does this matter when we are working with human beings on a regular basis? So Lindsey, anything that you would like to add?
No, I think this is just a great topic to think about and prepare for. I mean, like Claire said, we're coming out of a strange time, and this just seems like the best time to refocus and connect on a different level, especially when we are going to be seeing something new all over again as we restart again. So I'm excited about this.
So to give you guys a little bit of background into who we are. So I'm Dr. Claire Muselman. I'm the Vice President of Workers' Compensation for NARS, North American Risk Services. And we are currently creating the first ever Workers' Compensation Center of Excellence, really focusing on exactly a lot of the components we're going to talk about today. How do you use emotional intelligence in the work comp landscape to make a differentiator in the world? Lindsey, who are you?
Yes, I'm Lindsey Mills. I'm an attorney with a firm. We practice primarily in workers' compensation, representing employers and insurance companies, defending them in the Midwest. So again, I'm excited to be here. I think both Claire and I are, and hope that we can talk about some interesting ideas moving forward.
Yeah, so we're here today to really try and give you guys just a broad basis of what Lindsey and I have found to be helpful and resourceful tips surrounding emotional intelligence and leadership. No matter what seat you sit in this industry, you have a leadership component to your desk, to your work, to your team, to the people that you interact with. And so we really want to highlight some of those components that you can use to just really enhance your life to be the best. So where we're going, we're going to take you on a journey. We're going to give you some takeaways, and then we're going to give you some resources in case you want to continue to explore this. This isn't a one-time topic. Lindsey and I will probably be back because I couldn't fit everything into an hour, and we're going to be very respectful of your time today. So we will probably have a part 2 at some time, but at least you can have some components that you can take away and start implementing and executing into your daily life. And it really is, how do we move into the future? What are we going to do? And I want you guys to think about actionable items, and we're going to ask for them before you leave, to just give us one action item that you're going to take away from today's presentation to start executing and implementing into your daily life. So with that, let's just start out with humans. Humans are complicated. So when you look at just who you are as a person, and I always like to do this from the mirror approach, and Lindsey, I don't know if you've got any different approach to this, but we tend to always focus outward, but when you're using emotional intelligence, you need to start inward. So we're complicated. We are multifaceted, we are multifunctional, multidimensional, and we are multi-emotional human beings. Whether you are working in work comp claims, if you're working in underwriting, if you're working in marketing, the way that we are looking at the world is in such different, vast approaches that we've really got to take a step back and start looking at the entire person. And so since my background tends to be the claims side, I like looking at it from that when I'm working with my team and what my team is going through, as well as what are our injured workers going through? When they sustain an injury, like how many other components are in existence aside from that injury that they sustained? Lindsey, anything that you want to add with that?
Yeah, and I think in my industry of the legal aspect of it, I think it's really hard to sometimes understand the difference between IQ and EQ. And especially as an attorney, I get into a role where I want to be smart, right? I want to have high IQ. I want to do everything by the book and win that IQ component. But how important is EQ in those interactions? And how important is it for me to understand that this is not about sometimes the law or who knows more about the law or who understands more or sees the claim a certain way, but it's rather understanding all the dynamics that might be in the room that I'm working with, whether it's opposing counsel or the injured worker or the claims professionals handling the claim from the beginning to now. All those different dynamics. I think it's good to differentiate IQ and EQ when we're talking about how this can improve. And it's so important to look at yourself first, because I'm not for sure if you can truly develop this with others around you if you haven't really done that tough work of looking at yourself and seeing where do you fit in on this emotional scale. I think sometimes we are distracted and it's easy to go through the motions, but are we really focused on this aspect of how we can change behavior, improve behavior, and really grow and be better?
Then to start out with that, so I want you guys to take a couple of reflection moments here. Like, what gets you excited? Like, what about it? Is it in your life? Is it what fuels you on the weekends? You know, we do so much of giving to other people that there has to be that balance of how do you refuel yourself. And I am so guilty. If any of you know me outside of just being here today, I burn hard, fast, and I've had to really take some time to focus on what does get me excited and how do I choose to refuel. And when you're looking at things from this, when we're looking at like the complexity of human beings and how we work with them, can you change your perspective or view? A lot of times we get so in the weeds on things that does it help to pull back out and look at that 20,000 foot view. So do you see a fire or do you see just a little bit of smoke? And can you change your perspective to help understand where that person is coming from? And do you have the right lens on the chaos within that day? Like, is this really something that can work itself out, or do we need to bring attention to it? And a lot of those times leaders get that wrong. They'll come hard and fast without really taking the time to understand what is going on in that whole picture. And we can look at this with injured workers as well. You know, we think a lot of times, I know I hear it, and I'm sure Lindsay does too, well, this employee is a bad employee. Are they really, or is it just the injury that's kind of causing a thorn in the side of what's going on at that bigger scope? So you got to take out time of your day to really really take a good analysis of the situation and yourself. So what is your perspective and what is your angle? Is there a way that you can either soundboard it off of somebody else, or this is where it's really important to build a tribe to make sure that you are looking at things from all different aspects and you don't get tunnel vision. A lot of leaders go down that tunnel vision road, and I will say adjusters do too, where we get so focused on one thing that you fail to understand the complex system that exists around it. So then you've got to really think about, like, what is one thing from the scope of your control right now? Like, are you in the place of the most potential? If you ever hear me talk again, I speak very intensely on work comp is one of the coolest places on the face of the earth, because every interaction you have with people, you have the single ability to change the trajectory of their life. So if you're an adjuster, every time you talk to an injured worker, you have the ability to change the trajectory of their life. It is how you do it. It is how you deal with it. I'm a firm believer that when you are looking at interactions with people, you leave them more full or you deplete them. There is no in between, because if it's an in between borderline, you just wasted my time. So how are you engaging with people? And this goes into intentional time, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what is the stuff that you bring to the table so that the interactions with the people around you, you leave them feeling better, and you're then also on the receiving end of feeling awesome after you're talking to people or interacting with them. And this is where emotional intelligence takes in such a big component of this, because you've got to be intentional with your time. It is not about making mistakes. There's always more than one right answer to a problem. Just keep looking for that next answer. So then you've got to think about it. How many times in a week is it up to you? So when you're looking at this, really, when do you get to make the decisions? How do you get to choose where you move forward and where your next steps come from? And when we look at humans being in this multidimensional component, it is really, we've got to start seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. And since we are in the workers' compensation space, this space has been around for 120 years. I think it's Katie Hensley, who I saw was on here today. We did the history of work comp last month. This space has been around for a really long time. I choose to see the extraordinary in a field that looks very ordinary. People, like, when you think about it, if you're interacting with employers, I hear so much of the time that we are, oh, well, this person's dragging on, or this person's a bad employee, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? We've been talking like that for 120 years, and it's time that we stop. We need to start changing things into the extraordinary, where we actually side with people for, let's try and get you back to being a functional contributing member of society. So that's when you're using emotional intelligence and these components, this is where, are you ready to embrace this? and respond. Linz, anything else?
Isn't it so important to not take, if you're truly looking at yourself and you have the right perspective about what the common goal is or what you're wanting to accomplish, isn't it true, the quote, not taking things personally is your superpower? Because I think that derails us all. When we become more interested in ourselves and being right, or having our way be chosen as the correct one by everybody around us, that if that doesn't happen, we lose sight personally of the common goal, and we become more obsessed, I think, with the fact that we took something personally because of a small step in the process. So I think it's really important to, again, look at yourself, but think about what the goal is, so you don't derail yourself on some small issue, just like we're talking about with, maybe it is the employer who had about one thing that happened early on in the claim, and that is overriding now the negative feelings about resolution and finding the best way to get everybody to the same table. So I think if I said that quote correctly, not taking things personally is a superpower. So I think that's a start.
I couldn't agree with you more. So that's a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about, culture. So there is this misconception, and I'm going to state this as a misconception, that culture is organization-wide, that an organization has a culture. I'm going to challenge your belief system, if that is something that you do choose to believe. It matters about the direct leader. Culture is defined by leadership. So the leaders of your individual teams are what drive an organization's culture. So you can have people that exist within a culture that might be less than desirable that are thriving because their leader makes the difference. And so when you're looking at it from this perspective, there's two ways that you can think about this. Are you working in the system, or are you working on the system? And it really talks about, like, are you managing stuff by working in the system, or are you helping lead the people? How are you coaching? How are you helping people rise to the occasion of their potential? Because that's truly what our job is as leaders, is really to develop and pull other people along with us and add seats to the table to continue to make a big collective dynamic of what is important and where we want to go with our vision. So when you look at that, when we're looking at taking an evaluation, take one of yourself. How much are you working on things, or how much are you working on yourself and how you behave and what your behavioral patterns are? Then you can look at it from the scope of your team, whether you are a contributing member of a team or you are on a team, or even in your family. How much time do you spend worrying about the things that are going on in the system or in the daily tasks? And then how much time do you work on the system? Then you can look at what's the culture. And a lot of people within the same organization are going to tell you very different stories of what they feel. We talk about, does it really matter who's on top? Well, it can, depending on where your leaders are strong suited, who has their voices, who's listening. And as we look at that, then that's what makes up the culture of an organization. I've worked for great people. I've worked for terrible people, and I've learned from all of them across the board, because it's really, there's always some good in every day. And not every day is great, but you can always find good in it. And that's where, when you look at your desk, we've talked about, all right, what's in your scope of control? How many choices and decisions do you get to make that contribute to being a valued part either of managing the stuff or of coaching the people? Lynn, anything else that you want to add?
I just love this analogy, because I think it's so true. I think it's so easy to look at your administrative task and equate that to managing, and equate that to, hey, I'm doing so much on this management role. I've done XYZ today. Even if it's as simple, like Claire said, in your family, I unloaded the dishwasher. I did the laundry. I made the beds. And you go through this administrative task and you think, hey, I've really managed my household. But have I really looked at the people in the household? I mean, yes, they may be appreciative of those tasks that have been accomplished, those administrative tasks that have been crossed off your list. And I might need to tell everybody that I did all these things today, but is that really helping the people in my household? Is that really bringing everybody along or understanding what my people need that day? And so I think that's a great analogy between management and coaching. that you can manage your day-to-day tasks, but are you working on the big picture and the big goal? And what can you do to do that?
And I love how Lindsay highlighted just like the home dynamic. Like, can you delegate that? Are these teaching moments? Are you helicoptering it? Take it into a work setting. Are you micromanaging your people? Because guess what? You can't thrive on empowered people if you're micromanaging them. So how are you coaching them to be better? So let's say there's a couple of little tasks that aren't going as well as you would like them to go. How do you manage that? Do you then micromanage them to make sure that everything is done in the way that you want it done? Or do you look at the bigger picture of how do you evoke the emotions and the behavioral patterns needed to get that person set up for success? And that's where emotional intelligence comes in. Every interaction that we make with people is going to build trust or it's going to take it away. And I know that that seems kind of harsh and that sometimes that you feel like there's those meaningless conversations, but they're not. There's always an exchange of energy. And it's, again, like I said earlier, it's either going to move you forward or it's going to deplete you. And so you're going to build the trust or you're going to take it away during these moments. So two of the most important leadership attributes are understanding human behavior. So that's kind of why we're here. We're talking about emotional intelligence and understanding the power of humans. And then it all comes down to communication. How do you communicate clarity, alignment, and purpose? And those are those big things, because if people don't know where they're going, how are they supposed to know how to get there? And a lot of times we can give here, I need you to get to point B, how you get there, I don't care. We're at point A. But you've got to establish some type of clarity, and it needs to be in alignment to get people to thrive through engagement and through purpose. Passion-filled purpose is what I like to call it, because I don't like to do things that I don't fully go 190% on, because I want things to be made better, more beautiful. I want to make things better for human beings and the experience to be that much more, because we can. Because when you bring your full self and you bring your authenticity to the table, this stuff makes it a lot easier, because it helps make these realistic connection points of understanding human behavior, because we're all human. And the pandemic really illustrated this to this point. Like, I'm coming to you from my office and my dog is sleeping on the, what is this? A beanbag from my daughter's childhood while he sleeps, because you know what? I'm a human being. I have a pet, I have a child, and that is me. And I get to show up here today for you, still with my passion-filled purpose, but I'm doing it in a home environment now. So the pandemic took this like leveling playing field of understanding human behavior and understanding that we all have extra priorities. It is so easy to work a ridiculous amount of hours when you're working from home, because you can just keep going. So we've got to do a good job of understanding human behavior and the elements that make our people, because it is what matters. It is how we drive better success, by understanding and empathizing with the situation that everyone is dealing with right now. And all of these leadership traits become really easy when you are able to develop trust, when you are able to develop respect, and you then end up with rapport. So a lot of times what we've seen, and I think Lindsay can attest to this as well, is there's a leadership vacuum, and all of the ideas come up to the top, and there needs to be some type of shared ownership along the process. And I'll use the advocacy model, my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to the leadership vacuum. So many organizations preach, they have this wonderful advocacy model. But then if you look at the 2019 Rising Benchmarking Study, 72% of adjusters have no idea what an advocacy model is. But back in 2016, 54% of organizations were using it. So there's a disconnect here. But this is a great illustration of the leadership vacuum. These ideas come up, but nobody talks to other people that are the decision makers on the day-to-day tasks and processes and procedures that need to be in place so that we can be successful with wherever we're going. And then the shared ideas and the vision don't ever come back down. So we've got to do a nice job of really streamlining how communication happens, and that we do reach out and ask for input and ask for feedback. I think one of the coolest things that I've heard recently is I'm taking the University of South Florida's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Certificate. And in the second week, there was a woman that was talking about unconscious bias. And she was talking about the design of malls out in Hollywood, and how that mall bathrooms, the gentleman's bathroom is right off of like the main path, but the women's restroom is down the hallway and to the corner. So she went and asked the engineers, can you help me understand why? Like if the women's bathroom is secluded, it can put up some potentials for sexual assault, et cetera. And so she goes and talks to these engineers. And what the engineers thought, and they happened to be 6 men, that thought, well, women want more privacy. But what they didn't think about was the safety measures, because if they would have gotten some shared perspective along this and different viewpoints, they would be able to understand that women want to feel safe. Like they don't want to feel like they have to go down the hallway and turn the corner and whatnot, where they're completely isolated and secluded in a public space. So I thought that was a really nice illustration of showing how the leadership vacuum does not yield to good, profitable outcomes for anybody that's involved. And when I say profitable, I don't just mean financial, I mean human capital as well, because it's important to get people's buy-in, not only for the best outcome of the organization as a whole, but for your people. So then you've got to think about, how many decisions are you able to share with a team every day? And there are consequences for dealing with people with no decision-making power and no information. So to have shared ownership, you've got to not just look at information, but you have to look at decision-making and where you can bring people in to solicit feedback. Because a lot of times you might not end up using the feedback, but it's going to at least expand your mind to understand what other people are going through. And Lindsay, I think you can talk to that a little bit more as well, with just in how we are navigating when we're working with humans, when we're working with teammates, working with injured humans. You know, there's a lot of consequences that can go into play when you don't take a good look at the scope of control.
But how many of us have been in that place where we think inherently that we're not going to put too many cooks in the kitchen, right? We don't want to have this be a big, broad discussion. And so doesn't that come down to, you want to seek input, but you need to make sure you communicate what input you're seeking, because maybe it's not ultimately if we do it or if we don't do whatever the plan might be, but rather how do we do it? And make sure that you're asking the team around you for the right input so that those cooks are productive and that everybody's going to make the great meal that everybody needs. And so I think we sometimes are so fearful of bringing in too many people, because if we do, then too many people are going to disagree and it'll just be, no, I think that's our communication problem, that we didn't ask for the right input and we didn't explain what we were looking for. And it has happened to me time and time again, whether or not it's in my personal home life that I decide to make a decision, very quickly, and the refrigerator that I bought at Home Depot doesn't fit in the space in the kitchen, and because I didn't ask for help in measuring, and so it gets delivered and the cabinet doesn't fit. Or if it's big, in my law firm, we've made big decisions to bring in software or new programs, and we've isolated the decision making to people that are not necessarily in the day-to-day aspect of using that software into every aspect. And so what happens? We think it's great. We're so excited to roll it out, and we roll it out, and the people working on it are like, this is awful. And so I just think it is definitely an area where you're going to make mistakes, but if you would just communicate and bring the people in, you're going to have a collective excitement about potentially doing some right. And I think it's, for some reason as humans, at least I'm inherently fearful of asking for too many people to give me input, because I'm fearful that then I won't get what I want, but I miss that big point that I will actually make sure it's very successful if I ask for input. So
love that.
So there is a question.
Sure.
Sorry, there is a question that was just, you're fine. There's a question that just popped in the chat from Rachel. Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask it, or if you'd like for me to read it. I'll go ahead and read it. She might not be able to unmute. So the question is, how can we ensure every employee understands and or receives clarity, alignment, and purpose? If our organization has a leadership vacuum, how can individuals move the needle? So what are your thoughts on that, Claire and Lindsay?
Linz, you want to go first?
I think this is a great question, because I think it identifies, that same aspect of that the decision has already been made, and how are we then going to continue as an individual, potentially not even involved in the decision making? How are we going to continue to generate collaboration in that? And I really think that again, it becomes about communication. I heard somebody say that sometimes when you're talking to people, you just repeat necessarily what they said. So maybe if you have that access to the decision makers, you just repeat, okay, so we're going to do this on the claim. This is what we're going to do. And you just continue to talk about it. And so that we can at least maybe get an understanding of why that decision now has already been made. But obviously the advice that I think we're trying to say is that all those people should have potentially been in the decision-making process or giving input before it was made. But I do think there are ways to go back and understand that collaborativeness so that ultimately whoever is explaining it to the injured worker or to the employer or, to whomever is going to be on the receiving end of it, that everybody is in agreement on the reason why.
Yeah. And one of the ways, so we talk about how senior level does make decisions because that is where a lot of decisions are made. The issue changes, and then the people who do it suffer the consequences. So I think we're kind of looking at it from the people that have to suffer the consequences. Okay, so you're dealing with the consequences, yet you had no information or any decision-making power in this. And that's where you got to take ownership of yourself. So we're doing that self-reflective stuff here and challenge the status quo by saying, okay, I understand that this decision was made. Here are some elements that would have been helpful in making that decision, or here are some of the consequences as a result. So if we're going to go and we're going to switch, let's just say we're going to switch pharmacy programs and we're not going to have a lot of collaboration with all of the people that are the end users. Like how is this going to function on a day-to-day? Like you've got to make sure that you're talking to the people at the day-to-day. So if you're in leadership or you want to take an active role in leadership, you've got to make sure who you're representing. And I love it. I've always said this, I will always be our adjuster's biggest advocate because I came from there. And I understand that the stuff that goes on the day-to-day desk work has to stay a focal point because any decisions that we make up in that C-suite arena are going to directly impact how quickly and how efficiently they can make good things happen for injured workers. And we don't want to inhibit that process. We want to make that process easier. Well, we should. And if we're not, then maybe you should rethink which industry you're in and why you're here. That's one of my favorite things to ask is why are you here and what keeps you here? Why do you stay? And so when we got to really focus on where are we swimming to? What is that island that we're trying to get to? And how does that align with the industry that we're in? So this really could be for any industry. It could be finance, banking, insurance, et cetera. It's just really taking, like what Lindsay said, is getting that collective buy-in to make those decisions. And if that doesn't occur, then you've got to be brave enough to challenge with facts and with objective information so that people will understand the consequences of their decisions for not involving you. But I hope that wraps that up. All right.
Love that response. That was perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So how do you keep your team warm? You got to keep your team warm. And I like this analogy because it's one of the easiest things on the face of the earth. You want to start changing how you show up to work and how you show up in your element. Start asking people how they are and then stop talking. It is one of the most amazing ways to start changing human connection within your environment, whether it's your family, your friends, your teammates, your injured workers, the medical bill providers that are calling, asking you why their bills haven't been paid, people asking for authorization, attorneys, either side, no matter where you sit. I challenge you to start asking people when they call. I understand that we all have a limited amount of time and everybody's busy. But I really think that this will help you relationship build if you start genuinely asking people how they are and then let it go. Because a lot of times people don't have avenues to be able to access people to say that. Add in a pandemic where people are more isolated than ever and people aren't okay. They're not okay, but they have nowhere to talk about it, to tell people about that. And the more that you can consistently do this and show up and genuinely care about what's going on with your teammates, with your people, with your friends, this is going to start effectively changing you at your core to start looking at ways and opportunities. You're going to start to hear things that you wouldn't have heard before if you don't genuinely ask. And I know people that you're going to hear mixed reviews on, email communication. Yeah, email communication, people are going to go through, they're going to do their how are you, et cetera, move into their content. And a lot of people are going to be very poignant in email communication and whatnot, but I'm challenging you in verbal communication and in video chats to start asking people how they're doing and genuinely care. If you are someone who does not like to do this, I challenge you to step outside your comfort zone because I guarantee you at some point in your life, your relationships are suffering as a result of it. And it doesn't matter whether you are super EQ savvy or you're more analytical, all of us can do a better job of this, because where we sit right now is called humanity. We are just doing business inside of it. So it does not matter what spectrum you fall on. It is our job to take care of one another. We're a society. That's what we do. And especially being a part of the work comp industry, like we do take care of each other. You want to excel and grow, there is someone in this industry that will help you get there if you want to. You got to meet people at the table. And this is the easiest way to start with the simply, how are you doing? Like Lindsey, in your experience, I mean, how often is this such a valid point of eliciting information from people?
Well, and somebody earlier asked a question about just even simple things like potentially why an employee is not returning to work. Sometimes asking these simple questions might uncover a reason that nobody expected, that it's not about motivation, but rather it's some very specific logistical concern about returning to work that maybe can be addressed in a completely different way, but nobody knew that that was the concern, and it already identified that this person was just not motivated or didn't want to work anymore. And I've heard, Claire, I've heard so many of you industry professionals say that when you have access to these injured workers, sometimes asking these very simple questions like, hey, how are you doing, uncovers other potential personal issues that have nothing really to do potentially with the work comp claim, but just could potentially help in getting everything back on the same track. If they're identified. And, I know that timing, we were talking about how can we balance all of this. And so that is, like Claire said, it's something that you have to focus in on, because again, you can keep doing the task, you can be issuing the benefits, approving the medical treatment, setting up the physical therapy. But if you're not asking potentially this every now and then, you're missing why there's maybe some lag time in recovery in this world. And so I think it's been just an eye-opening, a piece of information for me in my world, because I think the same thing happens in other aspects of the claim, that we're missing why we're hitting a roadblock in resolution, or we're missing why there's so much tension, because nobody asked these questions and found out how the person is doing and what's really going on.
Yeah, and I think even more so than just a team. So we talk about the heat. So we've got, how are you doing? What are your expectations for today or this week? And then we look at the appreciation, accountability, et cetera. And when we talk about together, we'll get through this. This is no different on a team than an adjuster working with an injured worker or a nurse case manager working. Let's set some expectations and bring some accountability to the equation, and then praise the accountability. So let's say we've got an injured worker that hasn't been out. They've just, it's pandemic, trying to get through physical therapy, not out, but need some type of socialization. Where if you have really built a rapport with this injured worker, you can say, you know what, Lindsey, I'm going to challenge you over the weekend or over the next week. I want you to go have coffee with someone or have a video chat coffee. And we've got to start thinking outside the box about what our expectations are. So our end goal is we want back to work, back to life. And in my world, I want people to be functional, contributing members of society again. It is what we all need this industry to start focusing in on. And it gets people back into their life and environment. And then you'll get back into your work environment, because all of those things all go together. They all go together. It's not isolated of just getting somebody back to work. We want people to be functional, contributing members of society. And so whether you're looking at a team that you are leading, or you are the leader of an injured worker in any capacity, these are all questions and tips that really help establish accountability. You have to have expectations, and then you've got to have some type of praise and acknowledgement to showcase that the accountability does exist, and it exists on all sides. And then we're in this together. This is a team approach. Workers' compensation is not adjuster and then injured worker and attorney. We all function together. It is our goal as a collective to reestablish somebody. So the whole purpose of the insurance industry is to restore the livelihood of human beings. Could that not be more prevalent in workers' compensation? Restore the livelihood of human beings. So think about that when you're a leader as well, when you're leading teams. Like, did you communicate expectations to your team so that they know where they're going? Like, I don't care how you get there, but here's where we're going. And then when you do something fantastic, do you acknowledge it? Like, we've got some statistics coming up about the lack of acknowledgement of people. And I think it's gotten even worse as the pandemic's progressed, but these are it's pretty scary stuff. But if you are able to establish intentional relationships, taking surface to substance, your job gets so much easier. And I know people say that this takes time. Yeah, it does. But the investment into what happens as a result of consistency of applying these type of principles is fantastic, where you really see teams solidify and gel. And that becomes the differentiator of what we do. It is doing this day in and day out. And yeah, it gets tiring. And yeah, you've got to find ways to fill yourself and other people, but it's worth it. And you know what? It makes me super excited to come to work every day. There are days that are harder, and Lindsay, I think you can attest to this too, but it gives us all a shared ground for engagement, which really drives excellence at its root core. Anything else you want to share on it? And also, one of the most important pieces that I want to highlight when we're talking about this heat element, one of the sweetest sounds that anyone can ever hear is the sound of their own name. So when you're talking to a teammate, a family member, a friend, and you say, "Good morning, Lindsay. How are you today, Lindsay?" And you use their name like, "Hey, Lindsay, I hope you have a great day." Most of the time we just say, "Hey, yeah, great talking to you, bye." Start using people's names. So you've got 2 tasks out of this slide. How are you? And pause, and make sure you start using people's names. I hate the term claimant. I think I absolutely hate it, and like really just like crawls up my skin. Injured human beings. We're talking about injured workers, And I know, Lindsay, you being in the legal realm, it's a little different. However, we're talking about injured people. So let's start using their names. Let's start talking about Lindsay. Let's start talking about Claire, and let's stop making it like, so that they're just numbers. And same with your teams. Sorry, it's so going on in this stuff. And perfect, right? The segue into language.
So we do have a question. I see Janine has a hand up. Go ahead, Janine. Are you able to unmute yourself, Janine?
Hi, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Oh,
No worries at all.
You're here.
We do have a lot of great commentary going on through the chats section as well. So Rachel says, great points, challenge the status quo, be brave. Brandon says, yes, active listening is very important. Jason says, we found that how are you doing is a leading into demonstrate care and compassion. Allah says, a well-communicated and unified vision, which includes a clearly articulated strategy of how teams need to come together to achieve a shared goal, is vital to enhance teamwork and to achieve internal goal or claim resolution. So lots of good commentary going on. But yeah, just doing a quick time check. We do have about 15 minutes left in this session. So audience, make sure if you have questions, please do ask them. Feel free to raise your hands or unmute yourself and ask.
And like I said, I figured we'd end up making this into a 2-part session because there's so much good content that comes into this. And there's so many elements that Lindsay and I wanted to share. So one of the other ones that's pretty vitally important is looking at language. There is so much power in your words. Like I just said, claim it absolutely makes my skin crawl. And I will correct, if you ever come talk to me, sell to me, engage with me in any component, and I hear you say claim it, I will correct you. I also have a broker friend, Lori Ragsdale. I'm going to give her a shout out. Same thing happens to her when she hears people say light duty instead of modified duty. And she will correct people, or she's like, it's a modified duty. There's nothing light about this at their time, at their injury in this. This is a progression. So it is very demeaning to say the word it's light duty when really it might be very challenging for that person. So if we start changing language, it really will help people start evolving and start paying attention to the words that they use and understanding the power of the words that they choose to use. So like with this, when we are hearing our teams talk, and this is more from that leadership standpoint, but you can also use it when you're working with injured workers. The past tends to showcase blame, victims, fighting. Like there's a lot of, well, we used to do it, like you hear that we used to do it this way, or well, in the past. Okay, it tends to have a negative connotation. So listen to what your people are saying. And this is where you can start to figure out what is going on. So we've asked, how are you? Now we're going to listen and hear what language is being spoken and what it's telling us. When people talk in the present, this is where we're starting to build that camaraderie and build tribes. It can be divisive though, of, well, we do it this way, they do it that way, which, you know, it sometimes can work out great, but other times it's showcasing you what's going on within the dynamic. Then you look at the future tense. The future tense, when people talk future, they're trying to look at solution focused, resolution and next, a resolution and next. And it tends to be more optimistic and opportunistic. And a lot of the stuff I'm sharing today, I'm sure you can bring me back examples of where it didn't work. I'm just telling you from the information and the research that Lindsey and I have done, this is what we have found from our own personal lives, from research and from experience. And so when people come and they bring you their problems, because this never happens, injured workers never bring us their problems, teammates never bring us their problems, but we've got to start flipping it to the future and getting people to be empowered to decide, what is your role in making this better? How do you sit? So if you're going to bring me an issue, or I'm going to bring you an issue, you got to flip it and say, okay, so you're bringing me this problem. Well, what's your role in making it better? Because as leaders, we do tend to solve a lot of problems for people, when really we should be empowering them to make these decisions themselves. It establishes much more accountability. People feel more engaged in their daily work, and it really helps speed the process. And then they're not coming to dump on you all the time. Lindsey, anything that you think about when we look at the power of tense through language?
Amen. I mean, I think it's a healthy response that if you're in a role where you are hearing people's problems or potentially complaints or kind suggestions, empowering those same people to help is going to help you. I think it's very much an important response, because if you don't turn around and say, well, what do you think we can do? Or how can we fix this? And you don't engage others when they're bringing it to you, you're going to have too much on your plate. You will never reach the ultimate solution because you will have too much on your plate. You can't be the fixer. You can't be the ultimate, complete fixer. It will require that team effort. And so I think that's excellent advice, that when you do hear that complaint or you do hear these problems, that you engage in how they and their role in making it better.
I think it's just imperative. It's imperative you start listening to the power of language, and not even just language. Let's go to our next slide. Talking about communication as a whole. Communication is what makes or breaks leaders. It does. It's exactly what makes leaders fantastic at what they do. And Ala, I know that Tandeka read your comment earlier, and I want to try and find it again, where you're talking about well-communicated and unified vision, which includes a clearly articulated strategy of how teams come together to achieve a shared goal, is vital to enhance teamwork, to achieve internal goal or a claim resolution. Absolutely, it is all about communication. And so again, where are you sitting? Are you sitting at the adjuster desk where you've got to give that goal to your injured worker? And in a former life, our teams used vision boards. We actually would encourage an injured worker to find pictures of themselves that showcase, like Lindsey out golfing. If Lindsey had a shoulder injury and she really wants to get back to golfing, we would encourage that you print out some pictures, put one on your fridge, put one on your bathroom mirror, and you started to get the injured worker to buy into their healing process. Because when you're communicating vision, where do you want to go? Because you know what, sometimes when you're working with injured workers or you're working in this space, there are times that we aren't going to be able to get you back to where you need to be. But where can we help set your sights on where you want to get to? At least let's get a vision of something that we can get you that is somewhere that you want to be, that you can see. And that's not even just for the injured workers. So we've got like a golf idea. And we had a woman that was 70 years old. She was trying to get back to the golf course. We were 6 months out. She just had surgery. And so she put up a picture of her injured or herself with her grandkids out on the golf course. And by June of that year, she was back on the golf course. You've got to give people meaning and purpose and give them something to go after. And this is no different when we're working with our teams. So where do your teams want to go? You know what? I hope my team wants my job, because, I don't want to be here the whole time either. I want us to start looking at it from a bigger scope. Where do you want to go? I'm going to help you get there. And that, again, doesn't matter if you're sitting on the adjusting desk working with an injured worker, if you're a leader wanting to be a director or a vice president or a CEO, what does that look like for you? And who are you working with to get there? Because communicating that vision and figuring out how people are going to come together to gel. I loved the analogy. Actually, my ex-husband used to tell me about this, how people could know, you have to think of a team like a car. You can't have 7 accelerators. So if you had 7 of me on a team, I would feel bad if you had to manage us. So I'll start with that. But you've got to have the brakes. You've got to have the direction. You've got to have the steering wheel. You've got to have the drive. Like there's all these different elements that make up that. And so when we're looking at communicating this vision, how does everybody fit into it? Because that's the other thing. People want to feel belonging. And that is one of the elements that really came out of the pandemic as well, is that sense of belonging and how we get into that space. So, Linz, anything that you think of in those terms? And I can
absolutely. I mean, yeah, I do think you're exactly right, that we have to find ways that everybody can contribute. And it's so vitally important to the team effort that everybody does have a contribution. I think it goes back to everything that's been said. I mean, really engaging and personalizing it. So it is something that everybody can see. If you've listened, if you've communicated, and if you've asked for the right input, you should be able to identify what everybody's hoping for, ultimately. So yeah, I think it's huge.
I love that. So then when we look at communication, I feel like this, we even take it into a family dynamic on this one. Publicly praise, private critique. Lindsay, I'm going to start this over with you for this one, because it's just when you're looking at things from like account management, parenting, leading, this is done.
I mean, it's so important. It's so important. And I think this goes to somewhat, you have to identify your team's motivation. What does motivate? Because I think that's a hard thing in a leadership role, is that you may generalize motivation for your team and think that everybody is motivated, whether it's by money or by a quantifiable goal, and at the end of the day, if you haven't looked at your team as a whole and said, okay, each of these personalities are going to have different motivations. And it's so easy in your household, because your children, your spouse, your significant other, your parents, your relationships, everybody's motivated differently. And the communication style, do they like to text, or they like to hear your voice? All of these things. And we have really, I think, a positive of this last year has been, we've opened up the communication landscape, where if it's as simple as hopping on Zoom versus sending an email, because I know that myself can really, again, trying to find not taking things personally as a superpower, I can misread an email. I can not really see the gist of what somebody's trying to communicate. But if I was on Zoom with the person and I could see their facial expressions and their body language, how different that might be. And I think that's, as simple as potentially calling the injured worker versus, sending an email, or as simple as definitely how I approach my own home life with my children, is that there are children that I can address in front of the whole group and we can have those conversations. But if I choose to do that to my other child, he will take extreme offense to the fact that I'm having a conversation about him in front of others. And so I just think those are the simple identification and communication key components of working with a team, that you can't generalize motivation, you can't generalize response. And if you, again, communicate and identify, I think you'll see the difference in how your team moves together.
I think it's awesome that you identify it as Zoom. So we've gotten here, verify to clarify. We can't always jump to conclusions. And sometimes, emails do get misconstrued, but that's also like, how are we communicating with injured workers? How are we clarifying benefits? How are we explaining statutes? Things like that. But it also goes into like your team. Do they understand the expectations of their job? And how are you holding them accountable? So there's those type of elements that fall into this too, but specific to Zoom, there are some recent statistics that are out. So we talk about body language on Zoom. And so I know there's a lot of you not screen sharing right now with your cameras, but here is this for your Zoom worthy ideas moving forward. 55% of people will perceive you based on how you look, including on Zoom. So 55% of perception is how you look on that camera immediately when you show up. So little interesting tidbit there. And guess what? You can control that. You can control how you are showing up. And I know, again, we've kind of relaxed the landscape a little bit, But again, this is something that's within your scope of control. So 55% of how you're going to be perceived when that camera comes on is in the scope of your control. 35% is based on pitch, pace, and projection. So how you are doing this, it's very interesting on what's your speech cadence. Do you speak too quickly? And I teach public speaking at Drake, and my students know, like, I am very intent on what is your tone? How are you pausing so that people can hear you? And I think Lindsey, especially being in the legal realm, you guys have to really focus on this, because it matters from the communication standpoint of making information consumable. And that is another area that we kind of struggle at in a lot of different aspects, whether it's clarity on job function in the roles that we operate, or is it understanding the workers' compensation system and the ins and outs of the statutes and understanding that that might just be a baseline and we can go above and beyond. And then 10% is based on your content, which, I think we all would love to believe that content is the most important, but nope, we're going to go 55% on how you look and 35% based on pitch, pace, and projection, with 10% as into what you are actually communicating. So when you're looking at trying to make information consumable, holy cow. So then are you using just a Zoom? Are you using a phone call? Are you screen sharing to walk people through the elements that are important? There's a lot of, like Lindsey said, we opened up the communication this year and this past year. So how are we using that to our advantage to work smarter, not harder? And then you talk about like feeling statements too. When we're looking at communication, not everything is concrete. I always tell my daughter, she says, you always get mad at me for leaving my socks around the house. Okay, don't speak in absolutes. There was that one day last Tuesday. And so we've got to start looking at how we talk about things from I think, I feel, I believe, and pay attention to when people use those words as well. And then we're looking at this as a team approach. Like, this is all about emotional intelligence for success. So that's bringing people with you. And in order to do that effectively, talk about yourself and your team and what do I want? What does Lindsey want? What we could do together. And then you've got to establish those non-negotiables. Like, in order to get here, we've got to do X, Y, and Z. And I want to do it in this capacity. You want to do it in this capacity. What does that look like? And how do you come together as that team environment? And I think, Lindsey, when you guys are mediating, let's use mediating as an example. I want this, injured worker wants this, attorney wants this, and you've got to establish your non-negotiables.
Absolutely. And ultimately, I think when you have a position on something, you want empathy from the other side as to your position. And so the only way you're going to reach a connection to potentially find compromise is because you're going to have trust. And there's going to be that opportunity for empathy, because they're either going to see you on Zoom, or they're going to hear your voice, or they're going to, have that opportunity to communicate and ask questions. And so I think if we don't take advantage of the different ways that we can communicate and find common ground, we're missing the entire point of emotional intelligence, but we're also missing the entire point of our common goal and being successful. And so, it's been challenging in a legal world, from my perspective, to rely so much on a virtual environment, because we are so set into the evidence of the case, and that's very concrete, that's very objective, and now we've added this subjective element. So it's a challenge that can be used in every industry, in how you communicate and how you use these resources to your advantage.
And I know we are coming up across the hour. We are going to do a part 2 to focus on the rest. We put in a ton of content for you guys. We really wanted to showcase the amazingness of emotional intelligence, and Lindsey and I are really passionate about it. So we will have a part 2 coming to this series, because we do want to be respectful of your time. So thank you guys so much. Look for part 2 coming. If you would like to connect with Lindsey and I know Tandeka did put our information in LinkedIn. We are always open for communication and dialogue. So look for part 2, probably coming in May, and we will continue this beautiful journey of using emotional intelligence for success.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your time. On behalf of Mari Diaz, on behalf of the InTouch community, thank you all for joining us here today. We popped a lot of links in the chat, so please scroll through them, click on it, follow In Touch on LinkedIn, and become an In Touch member as soon as possible. So thank you again for your time.